Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. In this one I want to do some early speculation on Yang Chen Book 2, Novel 2. We don't know the name of it yet, so that's why I'm calling it Yang Chen Book 2. It's Chronicles of the Avatar Book 4. If you're wondering why we know it exists, even though we don't have any particular announcement about it, in a recent interview that FCE did, he did mention that Book 2 of Yang Chen's story will probably take place in Taku. So he mentioned specifically Book 2 of Yang Chen's story, and that's how we know there is going to be one. Obviously, if you've read the book, it is very, very clear that there is going to be another book, because Book 1 doesn't really resolve a lot of its plot points, and there is a lot that is left wide open, meaning there's a lot to speculate about. So let's sort of just jump in here. I have a document here with a lot of kind of questions, prompts for some speculation. Because like I said, everything is left open for the most part. There's nothing that really gets resolved. Maybe Zhongdu Honshe, but even him, it feels like probably he might be used, at least in some little bit, in the upcoming book. So I think one of the first ones, and I don't actually have this written down here, but it's just sort of how long is going to take place? What's the time skip going to be like between books? Is there going to be a big one, small one? Are we going to pick up straight up where the previous one left off? I think the only thing you can really base what the time skip may or may not be on is literally just that they mentioned that Zhongdu Chaisi is 7 months pregnant. So I'm assuming they're probably going to want to get us to the point where she either has given birth or is just about to give birth. So that makes me think that at most we'll skip ahead maybe a couple of months, if even that, because the whole setup from the end of the book is that we're in this really tense political situation where Yang Chen is trying to keep the knowledge of the combustion benders, of Unanimity, from the public eye, mainly from the world leaders, because she knows in this era the world leaders will all try to gain access to the combustion benders, and it will create a major problem in the world. Already she views the Shang cities as being like a bit of a problem on the verge of really going wrong, but this would turn things much, much worse. And so there's a sense where how many months, how many weeks is it going to take for eventually the information about the 3 combustion benders she has basically held captive to come out? And will that coincide with, for instance, the birth of Zhongdu Chaisi's child and stuff like that? So, to me, that's the way they're going to do things. I think you probably, just because a few of the little setup points, probably have to have at least a few weeks pass, just so you can have things like Kavik have some time with the Order of the White Lotus, but not too much time, and that sort of thing. But let's go through it. So the first thing I have here is personal issues for Yang Chen and Kavik. So basically, each of their sort of older sibling type characters that's very important to them, they have each have a plot related to that. So the first one here is Jetson is trapped in the fog of lost souls. Over the course of book 1, we find out that 1, Jetson died. The way that she died was spiritual in nature, and then they finally reveal to us that on that first trip to the spirit world for Yang Chen, her emotions basically turned a spirit dark, and as they tried to flee, Jetson sort of sacrificed herself to get Yang Chen out of the spirit world, but was captured there herself. So her spirit remained trapped in the spirit world, but her body died. That is 100% confirmed. Her body is gone. So she's still quote unquote alive in the spirit world in what is all but said to be the fog of lost souls. I haven't seen many people disagree with the idea that it's the fog of lost souls, so it definitely feels like that's what they're going for. Now, in terms of other references to this in the book, we basically just get the idea that Yang Chen feels this is something she has to do. This is something she tried to do in the immediate aftermath of what happened, but she revealed she could never find the location where they went into the spirit world. She could never find those specific dark spirits who attacked them. And obviously never came across the fog of lost souls. That this is a failing for Yang Chen, and she wonders why she can't find that specific area. the Phoenix Eel spirits obviously showed her a vision from Jetson's own eyes, and that made it clear that, oh, Jetson is still quote unquote alive, and it's playing on the idea of like, you know, your spirit can remain alive in the physical world, but because it's contained within basically the spirit prison that is the Fog of Lost Souls, it seems to sort of prevent her from doing what would otherwise happen, which is becoming a spirit over time, and instead basically driving anyone in there mad. So effectively she's having a similar thing like what happened to Zhao, like we saw, but obviously not as much time has passed. With Zhao, obviously it was like 70-ish years, the gap between him being pulled into the spirit world and us finding him in the Fog of Lost Souls. Jetson has been in there for 6 years as of the ending of the book, because it was Yang Chen was 11 when the incident happened. She's 17 now. That's how long it's been. So that feels like it's enough time for it to affect her, but probably not have Jetson go mad, because she seems somewhat comfortable in spirit world settings. So there's some hope that, you know, that's what was going on there. They cover a few bits about the end of the book, about like Yang Chen is like on the verge of giving up, being super active as the Avatar, and she thinks to herself, well, if I did that, it would give me more time to find Jetson. But she's sort of brought back into play, and she realizes no, she has to remain active as the Avatar, sort of implying the idea of when will she have time to go on a spirit world search. So the question with this, because it feels like it's very open in a way where like we are going to come back to this at some point. It feels weird if we just leave it like this. How is Yang Chen going to come across, one, I suppose, information on the Fog of Lost Souls, two, go to the spirit world, find it, and then like three, like have time to actually, you know, figure out how to get Jetson out and do whatever resolution you have with that. Because it feels like unless the main plot of the book involves needing to go to the spirit world for some reason, which very well could happen, it's not really clear when she's going to have time to just do research on this sort of side topic, given that she's going to be very focused on keeping information about the combustion benders in check. So I do feel we will get the moment where Jetson is found by Yang Chen. The question to me mainly is what happens like after that. Is she's freed from the Fog of Lost Souls. Does she decide to stay on in the spirit world as a spirit? Or are we going to get basically the answer to the question of like sort of what happens in this case, where like Jetson didn't like in a way choose to stay in the spirit world, she was forced to stay. Does she want to remain and basically become an immortal spirit? Perhaps not. And if she doesn't, can she choose to effectively like move on? Can she choose to effectively, you know, complete her death in full and I guess reincarnate or whatever? Now, maybe that's some sort of thing of like if she tries to, I suppose, do the reverse meditation thing, but there's no body there, will that finalize her death? That would be an interesting point to bring up, but I do think that we'll have a conversation. I think it will be quite emotional. The only other question, I suppose, surrounding this is that they do bring up the idea of, was Jetson potentially the Order of the White Lotus person in the Western Air Temple, which is why Mama Ayunarak even knows about Yang Chen. That is possible. I'd be surprised if in this very emotional moment they bring that up, but we will see what happens here. So this is an interesting plot because it's so important for Yang Chen, in that this is the thing that Yang Chen, in a way, this is the main failing that she has effectively because of her gift, because she has such a close connection to all the other past lives. She herself wasn't afraid of those spirits. It was a past life, and that's what caused this incident. So this is in a way why Yang Chen, in a way, doesn't like to seemingly use the past life knowledge all that much, is because it's, for the most part, has only brought her sort of tragedy and experienced tragedy. So we'll see if that relates maybe to some of the stuff they do with Yang Chen later on. Now, on the Kavik side of things, Kalyan, of course, in book 1 is revealed to be alive. There's a bit of a mystery about what happened to him after he left Bin-Er, But we find out that, okay, he was working for Zhongdu Hanshe, and from there, we saw that he was the key to getting Hanshe unanimity. So at the end of the book, what's very interesting about him is that he basically gets like, 2-ish chapters of time on screen and then is not seen in the book again. He plays a massive role for basically one key chapter and then he's gone because he's on the run at the end of the book. He knows that Shaisi is probably going to figure out that the reason she sort of in any way lost control of unanimity is because of Kalyan. So where has he gone to? And there's a few things. We'll get to some of the stuff with Shaisi maybe a little bit later on. But the question is obviously, where is he going to turn up again? I think Kavik and Kalyan are going to have some sort of a confrontation. In the same way that we have the Yang Chen Jetson stuff, and why would you bring that up if you're not going to do anything with it? It feels the same here. Kavik, I still think, has a lot of unresolved sort of issues with his brother, especially now that he, I suppose, fully realizes like who his brother is. His brother has fully embraced the life of basically an errand runner and it isn't coming back. It doesn't seem like it was something that he just did to get a better life for himself. He seems to really embrace doing all of that stuff and being the boss of one of these organizations, that he has very much changed, or to some extent Kavik had always, maybe hero worshipped his brother a little bit too much without seeing any of the flaws, seeing any of the ambition that was actually there. The fact that Kalyan never contacted the family, he obviously explains away with messenger hawks and stuff like that, but he could have found a way if he truly wanted to, I suppose, is the answer. There's one emotional moment where he gets across the idea that, like, I would have come back, but is that just more emotional manipulation from Kalyan towards Kavik or not? Because that's the main takeaway you take from that scene between the two of them, is that Kalyan very much manipulated Kavik and played on a lot of the dynamics we saw there with Kavik, which is that Kavik views himself as Kavik the Lesser and it's Kalyan the Great. That Kalyan saved Kavik, Kavik blames himself for what happened there, why Kalyan is missing 2 fingers, he blames himself for all of that a lot. And the whole thing with Kavik is the idea of he is showing amazing potential to be a great avatar companion, and you can see potential for him to be a very skilled member of the Order of the White Lotus. But then his brother seems to constantly pull him down of like, you're not skilled enough to be part of this organization. I'm the one who got you through all of these tests and so on. And the question is, how much of that is true? How much of that isn't? How much of that is just Kalyan playing on that weakness that Kavik seems to have about basically not feeling like he's ever good enough? So it does feel like they have to have a confrontation at some point. And I think it will turn into a fight. And I think you have to have Kavik win the fight. I would like to see just that happen, and just that big switch happen of Kavik finally realizes that in a way he is better now. He's not Kavik the Lesser at the very least. Something along those lines I think does have to happen. Now I don't think there has to be some sort of a thing where like Kavik kills Kalyan or anything like that, but I think just him not needing to be as connected to everything that happened to Kalyan is probably going to be key to him. Just move on and realize that Kavik, as he moves forward, can be someone much better than what he thinks he can be. In terms of speculation about like where Kalyan will turn up, one of the initial things that I maybe jumped to was I wouldn't at all really be surprised if he just suddenly turns up and like he's the new Zhongdu of like Port Tugok, or maybe he turns out that like he's taken the position of Zhongdu of Taku. That would be cool to place him in like a power position, or else he's like working for one of the other Zhongdus. We'll see exactly what happens there. But I feel it has to be like he is on the like other side of the law to sort of Kavik, because Kavik's going to be part of the Order of the White Lotus, kind of doing the right thing, ultimately helping the Avatar when he can, I suppose. It feels like Kalyan has to be on the other side of things, And I think it would only make sense that he, even as he basically has this opportunity to get out, just wants to get in somewhere else. But it's always something kind of criminal in nature. Just highlight the idea that Kavik has been able to move on from the errand runner thing. Kalyan can't. That's like my initial kind of thought on what they're going to do here. I think it would allow for, like, especially if we get to see Kalyan in action, he seems to be implied to be a very, very powerful waterbender. And we know Kavik, despite him playing down his skills at all times, is quite good and better than he thinks. There could be an amazing waterbending fight if these two do come into conflict. Now, we move on to Yang Chen. By the end of the book, no longer trusts Kavik because of the big sort of betrayal scene that happened, which is basically like right as Kavik is becoming the companion that we expect him to be, the chapter basically afterwards, after he succeeds on his mission, everything's going well, that's the chapter where Kalyan is reintroduced into his life, and things kind of go wrong from there, and Kalyan sort of manipulates him into sort of betraying the Avatar, and Kavik notes it's a sign of weakness. He could have chosen not to, but he felt like he had to do because he was guilt-tripped into it, of like, Kalyan says, like, I saved your life, so now you have to save mine here with this. And so by the end of it, even though he scrambled to get Yang Chen back into play, and it just about worked out, the idea for Yang Chen is that Kavik letting it go as far as it did makes it so that the political situation is the way it is. Because they didn't stop unanimity from ever being used, now there is even the suspicion of it being what it is out there, whereas it could have been kept completely secret. And in a way, that is all down to Kavik and the fact that he didn't tell the truth in this situation. Now, will the two of them reunite in the next book? I feel if you reread those books, and especially some of those key Yang Chen and Kavik scenes, I think there is a friendship connection between these two that is really, really strong. I think there is definitely the case where I think these two sort of like need each other in each other's lives. Yang Chen, I think, just needs a companion her own age, who she can have some kind of fun with. Their kind of fun banter, especially from like the earlier chapters, and that continues. That is needed. Kavik also, as we see, doesn't have many friends and needs someone like Yang Chen in his life. They are better with each other. Obviously, it makes sense. Yang Chen is very upset about the betrayal, and Kavik completely understands that it was a big moment of weakness for him to do this. I do think they can reunite. Will it get back to the point where Kavik is full on a companion again? You know, perhaps. I think we can definitely get there. I think it would be a big moment to do that. The question is obviously, how does that happen? If Kavik is going to be with the Order of the White Lotus, the question I suppose is more about like how connected to the Order of White Lotus is Yang Chen now, because Yang Chen didn't really seem to get on with Mama Yunarak, but we also don't know what way they left each other, what terms they left each other on, in that is he being recruited into the Order of the White Lotus in a way because of Yang Chen or not? So if she sees him with the Order of the White Lotus, is that going to be something she knows about, or will she be upset about that? There's a few questions like that. But I think all that really needs to happen here is Kavik, like he does often in the book, he needs to have one of those moments where he really sort of proves himself that he's in on the mission and that he has changed. He won't be able to be swayed anymore. And if Yang Chen can, I think, see that would, I think, get them back on good terms. I would like to see that happen. I think it would be, you know, I don't think you need to keep this drama up between the two of them. I think they've done a good job at developing Avatar and Companion, and I think ending the 2-book series, if it is a 2-book series, with the two of them as companions would be very, very good. So that's my thoughts on that. As for Kavik, the main thing with him coming out of this, obviously we got the Kalyan thing, the dynamic with Yang Chen, is that he seems to have been recruited into the Order of the White Lotus at the end of the book. Now the question about this is he being recruited because Mama Ayunarak honestly sees something in him and she thinks he would make a good Lotus? Or is it just because he knows about unanimity that, yeah, we should look after you because you have all this key information? Kind of like what happened in the last scene of the book, where a Unarak basically prevented Kavik from being like captured / assassinated by a Thin Claw, from the Northern Water Tribe chief. Is it just that, but because you're part of the group, we can protect you better? Because if it's the latter point, I think that would play against, very much into the whole thing with Kavik and him not feeling like he's good enough. That, oh, cool, the White Lotus want me, but oh, they only want me because of the information I have, not because I'm skilled enough to be part of the organization. But if it is the other point, it would be a more notable thing, I think. I think there seems to be a little bit of respect between Kavik and a Unarak. So, I don't know. We'll see how this plays out, especially with the Yang Chen dynamic in this case of like, will Kavik be sort of a plant for the Order of White Lotus with Yang Chen, or a plant in the Order of the White Lotus for Yang Chen? Will there be any element of that at play here also? And then, with that in mind, what is he going to do? Yang Chen has obviously sparked a Unarak and the White Lotus into acting on the incident. I guess the incident has now turned into a moment of generational import where the White Lotus feel like they need to take action here to prevent unanimity from being known about. So obviously, a Unarak did that by stopping Kavik from being captured. Now what are they going to do from here? Obviously, they have stuff going on in Port Tugok, but that scene at the end of the book happened in Bin So, what exactly is going on here is the big question. Might we see a return to one of the water tribes, or what? I don't think there's too much necessarily to say, but I think it was interesting that the first Yang Chen book did present, say, like Yang Chen as having a quite negative view on the Order of the White Lotus for basically not acting in situations when they very much could have, of only choosing to act when they deem it to be important and not just because someone needs help. How will Kavik, who we know likes to help people, how will he feel about the way they operate? That's going to be an interesting dynamic in the book as well. Some more Yang Chen stuff here. So, will we better explore her gift, her strangely strong connection to the past lives? This was probably one of the main disappointments with the first book, was that outside of like the initial chapters and then what they eventually did with the chapter 2 into chapter 30 reveal with Jetson, they never, in any of the present day stuff, really, I think, utilized all that well the fact that this is a thing that Yang Chen can do. The main point that the book wanted to make with this was when she has the conversation with Mama Unarak, to just sort of point out the idea that I've talked to dozens upon dozens upon dozens of avatars, and the only thing I really get from them, the only main pattern I get, is just that they all wish that they were more active, and that I've experienced a lot of regret and a lot of failure from the previous avatars. And so I'm going to do everything that I can to avoid those same sort of pitfalls of previous avatars. Otherwise, like the actual idea of like a past life event or incident causing an incident in her own life seems to mostly be averted because she's strong enough to avert them. I'd like to see a few more direct references, because some of these scenes I think could definitely work a bit better if you just told us what the actual event was. Like, say, the claustrophobic avatar. What specific incident in that avatar's life is being remembered there, other than just the general fear? That would have been made it more impactful for her to just know that, for instance, like, a past avatar like died in like a cave collapse or something like that. That sort of a thing. A big one that I think a lot of people do want to see is, will she speak to Avatar Zito, the avatar before her? Again, it was interesting that she talks a lot in the book about how like she's spoken to many avatars of past, but she doesn't specify specifically that she has spoken to Zito. She talks about how the idea of like with Fei Shan, the agreement that she comes to, she lies about how the past life communication works, but she never really gets across the idea that like if she even has or has not had like a proper conversation with Zito about things full stop. I feel like they need to say something. Will they do the same thing that they did with, say, like Yang Chen in the Kyoshi books, where the conversation that they end up having was more of a like, hey, I've gone down in history as a great avatar, but personally, I have a lot of things I wish I could have done better at. And what are those things for Avatar Zito? Will we get them explored? Because otherwise, it seems like Yang Chen has moved to kind of realize that, okay, I can also sort of get my way a little bit by using the legacy of Zito and the fact that I can communicate with him. I can tell people that it was Zito who made the decisions, and she can get stuff done that way. But that's not the same thing, I think, as perhaps having a very notable conversation with her past life. But I think that's just a fun thing. I think I would very much like to see that. I do have a feeling, though, instead of just doing that direct sort of ending of Shadow of Kyoshi scene with Kyoshi and Yang Chen, they might just have that be, this is where the Yang Chen Jetson stuff happens, like right at the end of the book, as the sort of emotional sort of send-off at the end. But we'll see what they do. And then this is another notable point. To the people of Bin by the end of the book, she becomes basically the legendary Yang Chen that we heard about in Kyoshi's time. She is greatly revered and respected for being able to actually implement some change in Bin by the end of the book. By the end of book 2, we see basically why she is regarded as one of the best avatars ever worldwide. So will this book maybe be her making an influence on all of the Shang cities or anywhere else? We'll see. As for the Shang cities themselves, this is of course the main world building element of the books. So with Bin and the situation at the end, she's made this agreement with Earth King Fei Shan that they basically will work together to improve things in the city. He's going to sort of step aside to a certain degree and let her actually implement change. So the core thing she set out to do at the start of the Dawn of Yang Chen, she was basically able to do by the end of this book, and things will change. Hansha, she basically has captured, he's out of the way, and because there's so many air nomads in the area, she more or less has the kind of political edge here in Bin This is a city that she has affected and has improved. I'm assuming it will be an overall pretty good place. The only problem seems to be that the other nations are sending spies in to basically try and figure out what actually happened during the finale events of the first book. But otherwise, the general improvement of the city is quite good. Janduri, on the other hand, is a city that Yang Chen at the end of the book basically has no influence over, and she can't really do anything about, because the only edge she has is the idea that she knows that Chai-Si is involved in Unanimity, but to use that she has to make public what Unanimity is, because that's what effectively the quote-unquote like crime is, the thing that Chai-Si has done that is a problem, that is wrong. Otherwise, there isn't really much on the outset that it really seems like Yang Chen can do to get any sort of an edge to make Chai-Si change things in Janduri. So this is obviously going to be, I think, one of the key elements of the book, is that this is, I guess, why we're not going to be set in Janduri, is just because they're going to be so aware that Chai-Si's eyes are going to be all over them. So this is, I guess, why it's not going to be Binner, it's not going to be Janduri. We're probably going to focus maybe more on the other two Shang cities in the next book. But I think Janduri will be important just because Chai-Si, I guess, will be more positioned in a bigger role for the next book, which we'll get to in a second. Port Tugok. So the Zongdu of Port Tugok gets mentioned, Zongdu Ashuna, who is up in the north on like a sabbatical or whatever, may become more of a character in the book. I would guess this probably would bring this character back into play, just because if there's issues going on in the Shang cities, you need all the leaders active to a certain degree. Obviously, there is an Order of the White Lotus presence in or around Port Tugok, as we saw in the book. So, might this be one of the other cities that Yang Chen is able to like have a good influence on and maybe change things? So we're in this situation where maybe she's improved things in 2 of the Shang cities, but the other 2 nothing has happened with. Obviously Jandari she can't do anything with, and so this is why Taku becomes like a bit of the focus, because like I said, here probably take place in Taku. So yeah, Taku mostly unexplored in the first book, but book 2 will be set there. In terms of what we know about it, obviously you can see here FCE mentions that which we get a glimpse of in The Blue Spirit, as a once prosperous city now in decline. The show's world building has Taku as a place where cargo was distributed. So if you're wondering where that comes from, it's stuff like this. This is the old Nickelodeon website information. Abandoned ruins of Taku. Located along the western shores of the Earth Kingdom, the once great city of Taku was an important trading post. The town was used to move goods brought from ships to various locations in the Earth Kingdom. The Fire Nation recognized the city's strategic location and attacked it very early on in the war. It was one of the first Earth Kingdom cities destroyed. And then Avatar Extras references this very lightly when it comes to the Blue Spirit as well. But basically this is all we know about Taku, as well as like the imagery that we see from the show itself. So you can see sort of like Badger Mole statue, which is kind of cool. Very interesting looking town, of course. And then this, we would guess, is more of these sort of like Earth Kingdom Shang cities specifically, because you have one for the Northern Water Tribe, one for the Southern Water Tribe, one for the Fire Nation, basically. This is more of the central one, but it's still roughly along the western shores, because it's actually quite close to Jandari as far as we're aware, because we don't know exactly where Jandari is, but it's like obviously an island in between the 2 nations. So these 2 are actually somewhat close to each other. So we'll probably get good details on what exactly is going on here. So we'll see what happens there, whether we get introduced to the Zongdu or maybe something will have happened. We'll have to wait and see. I'm not sure specifically what they're going to do here that's going to like make it so that like, yeah, it makes sense. This is why this is the setting for the book. Other than I'm guessing it's just while we're dealing with stuff and we can't go to Jandari, tackling Taku does make some sense, I'd guess. So we'll see what happens there. The world leaders of the era, obviously we know about High Chieftain Oyaluk, Earth King Feishan, and Fire Lord Gonryu. They're all basically just looking to find out what happened in Bin-Er. Obviously, we see at the end that Oyaluk is sending out like Thin Claws, basically assassins, to gather information, with the idea being that I guess the other nations are doing much the same. Feishan, of course, has been set up very, very heavily as a massive threat in this era. You don't want to get on his bad side, but Yang Chen seemed to create a bit of a negotiation with him. But the big setup with him is that if he finds out that basically it wasn't spirits that caused all that damage in Bin-Er and that it was people, he's basically going to go on a bit of a rampage, and he doesn't really even care if his own nation suffers damage as well. So look at how he handled the Platinum Affair and how ruthless that was and how that changed an entire era. Imagine what will happen when he finds out, if he finds out. So Feishan feels like, okay, something's going to happen here. Because one of the major things that we know seems to be the case is that the Shang cities are not a thing in like eras after Yang Chen. We've never heard this term outside of the Yang Chen era. And obviously, of the 4 cities, Taku is the only one we know about. And of course, the lore doesn't specify anything about Shang cities or merchants or anything like that. It seems to just be history. It's gone down as a notable place for trade. And obviously that would still be the case even if it's not a Shang city, just because I guess of its location. So Taku might just persist even after the Shang cities go away. Because I suppose one thing that could happen here is that we just see the Shang cities go away by the end of the book. Because why are they in place? It's because of the Platinum Affair. And the reason that the Platinum Affair keeps the Shang cities in place is because the Earth Kingdom, the Fire Nation, and the Water Tribes don't have a good relationship after that event. And so only basically have any communication with each other to facilitate trade through the Shang cities. So if the three nations get on better terms and create proper trade deals again, there's no need for the Shang cities to be there anymore. And so there's this weird way where like these cities could go away very, very easily just by basically world peace sort of type stuff happening. That if Yang Chen creates some sort of negotiations between the world leaders, the Shang cities go away just by themselves. So that's going to be an interesting thing to monitor in terms of like, does that happen in this book? Or is that just going to be something that just fades away over time in the era? Because we know that there are some positives to the Shang cities and that they seem to bring people from the different nations together. But the leadership of them is terrible because of how it works and how most of the Zongdus only want it for money. And they don't actually care about the people, which has led to this problem. And look how much of a challenge it is for Yang Chen to get anything done. That's why it's such a major problem. But the idea ultimately is that these seem like very powerful locations, but the real power is in these characters more than anything. So that's the whole reason the plot in the first book happens, is because the threat of this character threatens to like undermine everything that's happened with the Shang cities over the last 8 years. And the same is roughly true with the other ones, as other world leaders as well. So we'll see if they, like, how big of a role the other world leaders actually play as we go forward. I still have a feeling that Chai-Si will be like the main like villain of the book, but depending on what they do with her, she might not necessarily even be in that position. It ultimately just feels like I think it's going to be more of a political book, where it's going to be like a combination of like Chai-Si, world leaders, Unanimity, and so on. So, getting into Unanimity itself. So obviously we meet the three combustion benders, Thapa, Zhao Yun, and Ying Su. They're currently held at the Northern Air Temple, but everyone knows that the information about them and their ability will eventually get out there and become more public, and mainly will reach the world leaders. And what will happen when these three characters discover that there are benders out there who can create explosions with their minds? That's the thing. That if they had such a like issue over basically like the incident that happened before, like a rebellion, what happened over like platinum and like one side favoring the other, can you imagine the conflict that would happen around getting control of these three characters and more? And especially with, I suppose, them being fire nationals, like the Fire Lord would want to like very much claim them all. That would put him in a certain position. But of course, what's interesting is that Chai-Si seems to run the tightest Shang city, where she seems the most protected in a way from her world leader. So that's going to be another interesting part in this overall. Obviously, the thing is, we were introduced to these characters very specifically, and they're more than just their abilities. You can see Thapa is very much a businessman. He's kind of aware that, look, hey, I took a gamble, a risk. I invested in myself to get this ability, knowing that this ability would allow me to earn a lot of money. I want to make that happen. And he's kind of like, okay, I've been captured. I'm at the Air Temple, but I don't mind being at the Air Temple because it's fine. You know, I'm basically, the Air Nomads aren't going to like do anything to me if I don't do anything to them. It's a nice little sort of holiday for him. But he eventually wants to be able to get into a situation where he does want to make some money. So what's going to happen with the three of them? Obviously, the idea is that they're all being held separately. They all have like, 6 powerful airbender guards sort of like around them at all times. And so the question is, okay, 6 master airbenders versus 1 combustion bender, with the idea that all of the 6 know what combustion bending is and know what to look for with the ability. Can a combustion bender do enough to get away from that many people immediately? It's a tricky one. You can see a way where they just could escape just by fighting in the right way, but it feels like there's an immediate, like, they should be able to be countered ultimately, because they're pretty slow between blasts. So unless they can guarantee to take out like all 6 in once, they're not getting out of this situation. So how do they get back into play ultimately? If the information just gets out there and the other nations begin to find out that, hey, they're at the Northern Air Temple, I guess the idea would be that the different nations would want to go to the Northern Air Temple, and this would suddenly bring the peaceful air nomads into this world conflict, because that's what they were sort of talking about during little bits and pieces of this book, of like the abbot sort of mentioning that like the world leaders won't like it that you are bringing your spies to the air temples to plan avatar kind of things that you want to do. And it's obviously even worse with her using an air temple as a prison. That if it gets out there, this would suddenly make all the other nations go potentially against the air nomads, who seem to have free travel like they've sort of have had around the world because they're so respected. But what if suddenly they are brought into all of these agreements as well, and suddenly the air nomads aren't allowed to travel as easily anymore, all because of this event? That's a threat of this situation as well. That might be key. So that's somewhat interesting. And then, like, especially like the other thing is like Yang Chen also wants to keep secret how she actually took down the 3 combustion benders as well, because if the world found out that airbenders can basically kill people so easily just by sucking the air out of a room, that suddenly makes the peaceful air nomads one of the most threatening nations to go up against. So that's another kind of a bit of a mystery thing as well. That information doesn't want to be gotten out either. So yeah, how will they escape? I don't really know. It'd be crazy if, like, say, like Honshu came back into play and he managed to engineer their escape somehow, but I don't think he's skilled enough to do that. Then the other thing is, does Chelsea have more combustion benders? So these 3 could remain captured, but what if there's other ones out there? Which brings us into Chelsea herself. So she's going to be, I think, very key to the book. She's one of the most interesting parts of the first book, even though she only has a couple of scenes. But the first thing, she is 7 months pregnant. It's noted in the few scenes that she's in that she's going to give birth pretty soon. And then will she have given birth by the time book 2 starts? Is this detail here to showcase her legacy or something more? So the 2 big things about her character are obviously the idea that she is one of the masterminds behind Unanimity, so the combustion bending project. But then what Honshu says about her is that, in compared to what she said to Yang Chen, which is that she doesn't want to stay on longer as Zong do. She views that as being a hard, fast rule of the role, that you leave when your term is over. But based on what he knows about her, she does want to develop a legacy. She wants this to be her John Dory, to be sort of like her island that her family goes down in history as having sort of control over. And I guess, is the baby just the sort of the second in that line, or is there something more to this? Obviously the idea would be, depending on what the combustion bending like research is and so on, might her child have the potential to be a combustion bender? Because obviously part of what's going on here is that she and Du Shim must have figured out that, like, hey, you know, this stuff here. She and Du Shim must have basically found a combustion bender who already had their abilities. That way they knew to try and work towards getting those abilities. And so researched on this character and discovered that, like, okay, this character's from here. Meaning the people from this place, this fire island, who knows where, are maybe more likely to have this ability. And then they figured out that, like, oh, hey, all these people are quite tall. So they have to be tall people from this island. They have the potential for combustion bending, you know, and then they go from there. But then they realize, like, but wait, it seems to be like there's only one person on this entire island. Even though they're all really tall, only one of them has this ability. It must be very hard to sort of unlock or activate. And so they do research into how to make that happen. that's what the big kind of combustion bending reveal we're waiting for actually is in a way for Chicey to finally, just speak and explain what the situation is. And then obviously the three characters could also do the same as well. Thappa seems very tight-lipped in that they've set up that he's the one who talks more than the others. Ying Su kind of owes Yang Chen a little bit for obviously healing her after the arrow wound in the final conflict. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they used like Ying Su as like maybe Ying Su's the one to speak first about how she developed her skills, and this is where they learn about the whole situation from. Because I think there's two sides of this, is that one, what do the combustion benders go through to unlock their abilities? And then secondly, how did the people running this program know to run it in this way, of course, because this implies like research into a bending technique, which is not really something we've heard about all that much in Avatar. So I like the concept and I'm fascinated to see where they go for it. But in terms of the other things with Chicey, it's like unknown origins, like that they seem to make a big point of that, like Guru Shoken. She doesn't know what specific nations she's from. She doesn't have any benders in her family history. It's an island in the South Mosei Sea, which is basically that sea under it's like in between the Fire Nation and the Earth Kingdom, but it's obviously the south. So it's just that sort of slight area before you start to get down more south and you're talking more like kind of Kyoshi Islands type stuff. So it feels like they're not talking about a fire island, just an island in between, and that's the whole idea. So what's going on with her? Why doesn't she seem to have many like aspects of history in her family? She as the character to introduce Yang Chen to Shoken. Is there any specifics about why she knows about him? That sort of thing in particular. That's quite interesting. And then she is the best leader of the Shangs, but she's also the more kind of like brutal one, actually trying to kind of keep her position. And then obviously these are the 2 points I just talked about. With combustion bending itself, obviously the third eye tattoo is something we're sort of waiting to see if they do introduce that or not. That would be cool if maybe if there is a fourth combustion bender introduced, maybe they have the tattoo and are much better than the other three. That would be an interesting reveal. That would make for a massive threat as well. Because obviously if Thappa was able to bend much more effectively, he would have blown up the Water Tribe district long before Yang Chen arrived, because of how long it took him to do his deep breaths ahead of the attack. So obviously, how were the other candidates found? It obviously suggests that they had to do research into what are the traits that make someone very likely to be a combustion bender. So obviously, 1, they have to be from the Fire Nation. 2, they have to be a firebender. 3, they have to be tall. And then 4, potentially likely from an obscure fire island type situation. There might be something more to it as well. And then the whole idea that Thappa says, the one interesting thing about the technique and how it happens, many people drowned trying to develop this technique. What does being underwater have to do with unlocking combustion bending? And obviously there's a lot to speculate on. I did a video on it not that long ago, so you can check that one out. But basically some ideas on this would be, for people who already have combustion bending, maybe the water dampens the effects of the combustion blasts underwater. Maybe being underwater in some sort of a meditation type situation forces some sort of an insight chakra situation to happen through meditation and unlocking chi paths, because that's probably the key thing that needs to be explained here. Because the uniqueness of combustion bending compared to other fire bending forms is that you have to channel bending specifically through your forehead. And that is a very different thing than nearly all other forms of bending. And so research into that and how to make that happen, that's a very interesting concept. And especially because it is to develop this technique, so it does imply almost that like they drew out the ability from people with the potential by putting them underwater. What was going on there, and the fact that people died, it makes it pretty brutal as well. So there's that. Next, Jujinta. actually ends up being a very, very interesting character. A lot of questions around him. They literally at the end of the book refer to him sort of as a companion. But is it more of in the Taegum and Akudan sense, or more in the Kavik sense? I think it is more in that sense, where he is loyal to her because she is the avatar, he is spiritual, he respects her, and she helped him deal with his guilt over what he did. Speaking of which, are we going to find out the details surrounding like what happened with him killing his brother? Because otherwise it seems like he's actually a pretty reasonable character who just got into a pretty harsh line of work to survive after he was quote unquote banished from his clan or whatever. What exactly happened? It is a lot related to this whole idea of a Yuyan doesn't miss, a Yuyan never misses, and the fact that seems to not just be a thing where like they are skilled and rarely missed, but like no. If they concentrate and go for a throw or try to shoot an arrow, they will hit because of whatever spiritual connection thing that they have going on. Meaning that like I think we really need to learn more about what it means to be a Yuyan. Like, what is Yuyan during this era? Like, is it a Fire Nation kind of clan? Do they have an island? Is it like a Kyoso clan type thing? Is it a Yuyan clan? They have their own island? Or is it something very different where it's more of just a specific family on a island or not? Because we have the Izuku Yuyan stuff from the RPG game, and it makes it a lot more separate than it is compared to what it is in ATLA and the military organization, the Yuyan archers. No, this seems like he is part of a clan and is a Yuyan. Yang Chen seems to know what the symbol is, but we don't know the full details of it. And then the spiritual aspect I think is quite interesting as well. And if this is the case, where like they are also from a fire island, it's interesting that there's the whole combustion benders potentially from like a unique fire island, Yuyan archers from a unique fire island, and then they both have long range, somewhat accurate based abilities that come from spirituality to a certain degree. I wonder, is that connection just like a coincidence, or if there actually is something there? And then the final point is just this one from the Kyoshi books. It was said that 2 of Yang Chen's close friends and bending teachers had died protecting her from her enemies. So Jetson is one of these, because the way there's a direct line in the Dawn of Yang Chen that words Jetson in a way at her death that like she was honored as being an avatar companion who sacrificed herself to protect her from her enemies. So it felt very clear that like that is one of them. Who's the other though? There's no reference, I think, to another character who's died, sort of implying that there might be another character who dies. So when they say close friends and bending teachers, are they both bending teachers and both close friends? So Jetson fits, I think, both of those categories. Kavik has not taught Yang Chen any bending, so that doesn't really make much sense. Boma, as far as we're aware, doesn't even seem to be a bender. And then we don't know who any of her other bending teachers were, so they'd have to introduce a new character, I think, to fit the right criteria on this. Unless the bending teachers bit is just meant to refer to Jetson, so Kavik will fit as a close friend here, but I'm not sure if I want them to go down the direction of having Kavik die. Because I would like to see that be just an ongoing Avatar companion situation, rather than sort of a he redeems himself by sacrificing himself situation. So, I think that's all we can talk about for now with the book. If there are any other parts that you would like some speculation on, definitely leave them in the comments below and I'll give my thoughts on them down there. But right now, before the book has been officially announced and we have like a cover or a description for what it is, or a title, that's about all that we can, I think, really focus on. I think this book has the potential to probably be one of the best Avatar novels we have had. Book 1 for Yang Chen, The Dawn of Yang Chen, was very much a setup book, ultimately. It still works and it's still very good, and if you like the politics stuff, I think it's a very, very strong book. But if they can nail this book too, and hit home a lot of these points, I think you solve a lot of the issues of the first Yang Chen book, and create just a really, really strong book, because you seem to have the personal character dynamic stuff going on of like Yang Chen Jetson, Kavik Kalyan, Kavik Yang Chen, all things that should get some sort of resolution in the next book. Kavik ordered White Lotus is a great dynamic. Yang Chen and the whole keeping the combustion benders hidden is a great dynamic. The mystery of, now that we know combustion bending is part of this, what's the details surrounding that is fascinating. What are the world leaders going to do? Will Chai-Si jump into the spotlight, or will there be other new characters to take that stage? It really just speaks to the idea that like there's so much good stuff set up heading into this book, which is sort of different than, say, The Shadow of Kyoshi. Going into that book, it's like, okay, we want to know what happened with Yoon. He's back. What happened? Why is he like this? And then Kyoshi and like the whole Karuk tease at the end. Those were the two main things. And then what we discovered was like, oh, we're going to the Fire Nation. That's going to be sort of like the gimmick of the book. And so it was kind of those three aspects heading into it there. With this, we seem to sort of know that instead of going to a specific nation we weren't before, we're just sort of going to the other Shang city we never went to. But otherwise, we are dealing with like every plot point from the first book, just expanded on more. And that's really, really good in my mind. So hopefully in the next coming months, we should get the, I suppose, product listing probably for the next Yang Chen book. I think they usually probably wait a while before they put up the cover. Assuming this has a somewhat similar release schedule to the two Kyoshi books, where Shadow came out like exactly pretty much a year after the rise of Kyoshi. So we're hoping that's the case with this one as well, which I think makes some sense if FCE is able to announce like prior to the release of the first book that there is going to be a second one. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are. What are your speculations heading into Yang Chen Book 2? Other than that, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.